Good morning, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to be here with you today and to be a part of this discussion and mediate this debate. I was very happy to receive this invitation from Professor Bosco. I think it's a very important discussion. Around a year ago, I met Miyakoto in Évora. He was launching his latest book. In talking to him and his publisher, I said, wow, you know, we know we know so little about African writers and authors, and Africa has such wonderful literature, but we don't know much about it. So we still have a lot to learn. So for this panel specifically, Dr. Graziano has brought up very important topics, and I was saying that these are such relevant topics because food and nutrition is the base for everything in any person's life. And so many numbers that you brought up, Dr. Graziano, impressed me. You know, how much food insecurity there still is with people who don't know if they will have something to eat at their next meal. You know, for most of us, we can't imagine what it's like to live like that. Something else that stood out for me is the malnutrition, the ultra processed foods that influence public health and children's development, especially. So I would like to start asking you, all four of you, this question, starting with Professor Graziano. My question is, what is the largest challenge to be able to strengthen this synergy between Brazil and the African countries? What is the greatest challenge? In Brazil, we still have people who think that Africa is just one single country. We were talking about this before this debate. So many Brazilians think, oh, Africa is just one country. They don't understand that it's a continent with multiple countries. So, to start out, what would you say is the greatest challenge to be able to um, have this synergy between Brazil and the African countries?
Brazil has a cooperation with Africa for a long time, including this topic of food security. In 2003, we started implementing several food security programs that were part of Fome Zero program, Zero Hunger in Brazil, such as school meals, buying from family agriculture. And we started implementing what was called at the time Fome Zero card, which was a card with some credits to buy food. Then it turned into Bolsa Familia, among other programs that have been developed by the government. So they are no longer so important for two reasons. First, financial resources. African countries, unfortunately, haven't been showing the capability of continue programs that have started with international cooperation. They have huge debits, and it's a crucial point. If you really want to help Africa forgive their debts, there's no way for them to do a program such as Bolsa Familia, which is some financial grants for poor people. This is an important movement. There's a movement that is not new, that shows the difficulty that we have in terms of the debts that African cultures have. Let's continue talking about those topics to foster this synergy between Brazil and Africa. So, Professor mentioned that the indebtedness that African countries.
Thank you so much. I'm going to switch to English, and I hope that everybody has the translation, right? Is that okay? Thank you, Professor Graziano, for having set such a great context for this discussion, and Mara for the moderation. And we are very honored to be here this morning in this very honorable panel. Yes, totally. We have to agree on the challenges. We have seen in Dr. Graziano's presentation that both the continental Africa countries and Brazil share this vast amount of arable but yet uncultivated land. But then they also have, yes, so we have these challenges, these similarities, but then also in the terms of challenges, but also the potential for the solutions. So we do have the diversity, but we have this vast amount of arable land that has been uncultivated in both sides of the ocean. And yet we have these examples that Dr. Graziano mentioned of reliance on imports for food security and sovereignty. So having to address jointly these kind of challenges is of high importance, because when we can share innovation, science, practices, the way we have context of policy makers and the private sector involvement is when we can have these two countries, Brazil and the continental African countries, as testing grounds that can be solutions in one country that can be then adapted into the other countries in Africa, for instance. So Brazil has a very important agricultural innovation system, and then we can use that as a platform to create global partnerships, which is precisely the topic of this forum this week, that can then address the severe consequences that famine and hunger bring to the countries in Africa. So we believe that through systems like the CGIAR that I represent, which we are the global research network that is publicly funded, and we have presence in all the continents in the world, we can be brokers and conveners for these kind of platforms of research and science-driven solutions to these context that Dr. Graziano has properly set up for us this morning. So I totally agree.
Isso que você colocou da inovação.
What you mentioned about innovation and technology, I think it is really a way to address solutions to those problems. Now, I'd like to mention a program that, both of bringing students to Brazil, where they were trained for this exchange of technology and innovation. So this is something that can be really helpful for both areas or countries, because Brazilian agriculture is worldwide recognized by its technology, innovation, and productivity. But this exchange of knowledge and culture among several countries can be really helpful to Brazil. So, continuing now with you, Professor mentioned, we already mentioned, the indebtedness being of the African country is a problem. We said that innovation and technology, the way you address the technological exchange, is a way to face those challenges. And I'd like to hear your opinion.
Thank you, Mara, and thank you, the organizer, and for inviting me to this panel. Let me start with 2 points first. So we are talking about challenges in Africa, and I would like to address something. We usually talk about Africa as a continent of challenges, but I believe also there are many opportunities in Africa. And maybe we can just mention one or two of them. First of all, it's a growing population in Africa. So 50% of the global population growth from now to 2050 will come from African continent. A very young population. I think being African also, and I had the chance to visit many African countries, it's always an opportunity to learn from the African population. And this young population is very oriented to innovation, willing to learn from experience from other continents, other countries like Brazil, for example. And I believe this is an opportunity. Maybe I can mention something else. The diversity is very important, and it was already mentioned before. So for me, frankly speaking, Africa is the biggest living lab in the world. You have everything there, different agroecological zones, crops, technicity level of the farmers. I mean, you have really well-educated farmers exporting to Europe, to US, to Brazil, I believe also, but also you have very smallholder farmers really just working very, very hard on daily basis just to feed their families. And even we are talking about climate change, etc., but still I believe the natural resources generally, I'm talking generally, because again, we should never confuse ourselves. There are different realities in Africa. But generally speaking, the natural resources, either in terms of land, water availability, if we take the example of basin of Congo, Zambezi, Niger, etc., there are resources there that we can leverage on in order to, let's say, promote other agricultural practices and more sustainable agricultural practices. Now, coming back to your question, I believe, first of all, the Brazilian experience is well known globally. And I believe somehow Brazil was successful to address sustainability in agriculture a few years ago. Now it's somehow the topic that everybody is talking about. And we strongly believe that in Africa, this is something that should be addressed. How? We start from the foundation. The big issue in Africa now is soil degradation. Globally, the figure is roughly 40% of global soils which are already degraded. In Africa, it's more than that. It's 65%. So, if you would like to feed the population, and thank you, Dr. Da Silva, there are lots of conflicts coming from food insecurity. So feeding the communities, feeding the population is also kind of targeting the peace. And just last week we were in the Paris Peace Forum. So, and then you could see the link between agriculture, between soil health, between sustainability, and between the peace. So we need to start from the soil health as the foundation and the ground to address new agricultural practices, addressing food security, addressing sustainability, because at the end of the day, agriculture is solution to the climate change, is solution to mitigate the environmental impacts.
And technology.
Say again?
And technology, because you have, porque vocês têm, because you have, you know, the terras raras in some African countries that is, Chinese is looking a lot with them.
Exactly. And technology, as you said, but there is one thing. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. And this is why the key word for us is customization. Each country is different. Inside the country, its soil is different. Inside the soil, each crop is different. With the same crops, each farming practice is different, and you need to address that. So how you can address that? First, you need to be present on the field, on the African continent. I can share with you later some experience that we had, but I think let's say now in a general frame, this is the first thing. You need to run the dialogue with the farmers. We need to understand the farmer needs, because at the end of the day, it's different from Brazil. You have millions of smallholder farmers, and their needs are different. They don't have the same needs, and by consequence, they don't have the same solutions. The big challenges are similar. Let's address it like that. But the solutions, they are not. And you need to customize them to each situation. And I believe also the knowledge sharing, or let's say the knowledge transfer, or how whatever we word that, is very important. And I believe somehow, for me, I see things. There is a kind of proof of concept in Brazil that need to be scaled up in Africa, but with customization. Not the same thing, for sure, but there are many things to learn. You give some example about students' exchange program, but for me, it's even beyond that. I believe scientific exchange program is very important, but why not farmer exchange programs? Why not farmers from Africa are coming here and also from Brazil are going there, exchanging experience, and let's do something to keep this dialogue between them also. Because at the end of the day, farmers, and I'm talking as agronomists, but also as farmers, they learn more from peer-to-peer exchange. They learn more if other farmer, other neighbor is adopting some practices. And still, Africa and Brazil, we are neighbors. I know that there are thousands of kilometers distance between Africa and Brazil, but at the end of the day, I think the cultural aspects between Brazil and Africa are very close. And I'm saying that being here many times, but also having the chance to deal and to work and to have some Brazilian friends, I think the cultural aspects are very important to address. So from my perspective, I would say, yes, there are many things to do. I would say one thing additional, maybe, let's say, from technology, agronomic solutions, etc., it's quite simple. For me, there are two things which are more complicated. The social one, and we need to address it. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the farmers. And for farmer, adopting a new practice is taking a risk, especially when we are talking about smallholder farmers in Africa, taking a risk to not be able to feed his family, or to send the kids to school, or to pay for the health, how can I say that, fees or costs, etc. And it's very difficult to drive the change or the transformation adoption with African smallholder farmers. This is why I was talking about peer-to-peer learning. There are also other ways to do that we can discuss later on, but for me, the social aspects are very important. The second one is the financial aspects. Access to finance is a big issue. If I'm farmer in Africa, I will never take a loan. Let's be clear. The interest rate is too high. And we need to do something to address that, because at the end of the day, bringing solution, innovation is good. But the most important is the adoption of the innovation by the farmers. Who is the final user of the innovation? Those innovations are not for me or for you. They are for the farmers. And if we are not creating the environments to encourage this adoption and to at scale, then we are missing the real target, which is having a real impact at scale for all farmers in different African conditions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you can finish the first round. I just want to tell you something. 2 years ago, I was in Berlin in an event called Berlin Dialogues. There were no Brazilian people there, only representatives of African culture. Olaf Scholz was the prime minister at the time, and he was really, really concerned with the presence of China in the African countries, and he wanted to have a closer relationship. And I found a former Argentinian minister, and I said, Brazil should be here to make this connection. We are neighbors of African countries. So among those challenges, we saw 3 answers to those challenges, and I'd like you to complement or say something to wrap up this first round of our conversation here at the panel.
Thank you. That's interesting. Yes, Brazil should be in Africa. It's very clear to all of us, I think everybody in the room, we agree that Africa, at the moment, the African continent, is the geopolitical and economic frontier of the next century. So whatever your organization is doing, if you're not doing it on the continent, you need to think about that. You need to really, really think about that and get ahead of it, because like she mentioned, the Chinese are there and all the relevant groups that need to be there are competing already. For me, I'm not a note taker, but I wanted to make sure that my points came across. And so I prepared a few things for the questions from Madame. In my humble opinion, when you've worked on the ground in African markets, you realize the bottlenecks are rarely in agriculture or agricultural. They are institutional and logistical. The challenge isn't growing food. It's moving it, storing it, and financing it. And I agree with you. Most investors underestimate how weak infrastructure and fragmented land tenure distorts price signals and risk perception. But that's also an opportunity. The returns are in solving inefficiencies. When you create predictable logistic corridors, structured offtake agreements and regional financing instruments, you unlock scale. That's what Brazil did over decades through the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. African markets can do it faster if we treat food production as industrial strategy, not social policy. And that's my thoughts on that.
Bem, agora eu queria fazer.
Okay, so now do you have any questions?
Ok.
Thank you. Just wanted to follow up on what Anis and Tempra have just mentioned about finance and the importance of channeling funds to the resilient and efficient food systems on both sides of the ocean. And I think we have to think of food systems as being investable. But for that to happen, we have to make sure that we have an effective public-private partnership and coordination. Because for the markets to work, we have to not just rely on yields and productivity, we have to rely on resilient markets. And for resilient markets, we need to have a context where the public sector sets, for instance, land rights system, certification, regulations that enable this kind of funding to be worth it. So I totally believe that what you have both said is key to foster this and encourage this kind of systems to be effective and bring the public and the private sector together to channel funds. And it's not just the public funds that are going to allow for innovation. It has to be, there have to be incentives for the private sector also to invest in innovation that can then be channeled to small and medium enterprises and smallholders that can benefit from that through the platforms of national innovation systems and South-South cooperation across continents. Thank you.
Professor Graziano, isso que ele está colocando
So, Professor Graziano, what he said is very interesting. Brazil has very large businesses in the agribusiness area that are well-known exporters. How are you able to foster and bring all these players into the discussion? Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit from this approach that you have mentioned, because we are talking about a massive process of misery and hunger globally. So we are talking, obviously, the farmers, especially the small rural farmers and rural producers are part of this universe. And even though it might not seem obvious, but more than half of the small farmers in Africa are listed in the FAO as the ones who are facing hunger in the world. It seems contradictory. They produce food, but they are going hungry. They aren't even able to produce enough food to feed their families. And it's not like enough cassava or enough rice. It's in general, they are involved in commodities. So, producing commodities, what they receive or what they are paid for those commodities isn't enough to feed their own families. So, I think we need to decide where we need to start. Obviously, technology is important. Obviously, increasing our productivity is important. Obviously, reducing the price of the inputs is important. Jar can confirm this, but in general, the inputs, especially in Africa, are twice what they cost globally. So what does that say? There is a monopoly. So in an inequality in trade. So the problem is larger. This problem isn't going to be solved locally. So it's not that the African farmers need to improve their productivity. Okay, there needs to be improvement, but we in Africa, we don't need micro solutions, but macro scale solutions that are basically related to peace, to end the conflicts and wars that are a huge problem there. Also related to the economic crisis, the indebtedness, and the impact of climate change. Because Africans aren't the ones who are polluting most around the world. They don't pollute much at all, but they suffer the greatest impact of the climate changes caused by pollution. So Brazil is one of the countries that is a great polluter. If these countries don't assume the responsibility that they have in impacting climate change, this is what will be discussed at COP30 now, if this isn't addressed, nothing will change. So the local solutions are very important. There is no question about that. But let's make a distinction about what needs to come first. What's the cause? What is the effect? We will not be able to solve the issue of hunger in Africa just increasing the productivity of African farmers. That is not the main problem. Well, Professor, in your ranking of problems, you mentioned the conflicts and the economic debts. To what point or to what extent is this economic crisis of the African countries, how much does that serve to feed these conflicts in Africa? So maybe another way to put it is addressing the issues of indebtedness in African countries. Would that be able to help solve the conflicts in Africa? That's my first question. And then adding to that question, what is the dimension of the impact of corruption in African countries that are nourishing these conflicts or also affecting the economic crisis or contributing to it? Well, I showed some maps. I showed the largest countries in Africa have internal conflicts. Some of these are, in some cases, it overflows to the neighboring countries. And there is a variety of causes for these conflicts. Sometimes they are tribal conflicts. They are internal differences in conflicts between tribes or countries. There is a difference in conflicts between the governance and governments in African countries, the ways that they govern and deal with the conflicts in their territories. So there is for sure a relation between these internal conflicts and the indebtedness of African countries. Now, where do we start to solve these problems? What is possible to do? Well, In first place, we can stop selling weapons to African countries, for example. Just to give you an idea, the cost of ending hunger in Africa is 10% of the amount spent in weapons by the US. Only 10%. Imagine that. So it is doable. It can be done. We can reduce some of this debt. So these are things that we could do to actually help. Now, the solution has to come from the African countries themselves. We cannot impose these solutions on African countries from the outside in. They need to find the way out of this. And these conflicts come from the 1960s in Africa. It's nothing new. These conflicts haven't started recently. And it's always influenced by colonial influences. Maybe in one moment it was Portugal, at another moment the US and China more recently, who have different economic interests in the African countries and who continue to exploit different riches and different materials from Africa. So improving African farmers' productivity won't solve these problems. I continue to insist on this. Now, that does not mean that it's not important to improve the productivity of African farmers, but that could help. Yes, but they aren't at fault for all these problems. Now, Anise and Templar, I would like to I'd like you to comment on what Professor Graziano said. I believe it's very relevant. So the matter of conflicts in the African countries, in what way should they be addressed? What was said here was that these conflicts have a greater impact on hunger than the actual farming production. So how can these issues be addressed? How can we find these solutions?
Oh, thank you, Mara, and many items, and we'll try to address the most of them. Who is generating the others? I'm not sure if the conflicts are causing food insecurity or food insecurity is the cause of conflicts. Historically speaking, the conflicts, I'm not coming from, I don't know history 100%, but to my knowledge, many conflicts, historically speaking, were coming from food insecurity. In addition to diseases, I would say, and to drought. I'm speaking from African perspective, knowing my continent, so historically, 200 years ago, 500, 1,000 years ago, the food insecurity was the cause for revolution and conflicts. Let's take some facts. So let's take the cereal productivity, for example. I would like to talk about concrete cases. And let's compare the evolution of cereal production between Africa, sub-Saharan Africa to be more precise, and China for the 40 last years. So the overall production increased for both, for China and for Africa. I don't remember the exact figures, but I believe it was 2.5 times for China, and I believe it was 2 times for Africa. So it's still great growth, we have to admit it. With a big difference. China, it was still on the same area of production. In Africa, again, I cannot remember the exact figures, but it was roughly double the area of production. Take it as indication, because the right figure I could not remember. At the end of the day, what does it mean? This production is coming from land extension. Which land extension? It's coming from deforestation. And this has environmental impacts. So this is why we need to tackle the yield gap. It's very important, not only for conflicts or for feeding people, but also for addressing the environmental challenges. Second, we need to address it in a sustainable way. not just, put in whatever we want in our lands, because the land is the assets for the farmers, and we need to be responsible. And the new agriculture paradigm is not only to address food security, but also to address the environmental and climate resilience. So we need to know which input we should put. If we take the example of fertilizer, we need to have the right source, the right dose, the right place, the right time. We need to train the farmers about good agricultural practices, etc. But as I said at the beginning, this is, let's say, the basic. On top of that, and Dr. Da Silva addressed that, let's take other example. Let's take cocoa production in Africa. And Africa is responsible of 70% of global cocoa production. Do you know the value that stay with the African farmers producing the 70% of the Africa cocoa production? Do you have an idea? Just guess. Give me a figure.
I don't have any idea about
Just say. It's not an exam. Don't worry. 5%.
Oh, I would say 15%.
5%. So with that, which willing, imagine you are a farmer, which willing do you have to adopt innovation, whatever? No. This is why it's very important not only to address the yield gap, to address the food security, environmental and climate resilience, but also it's very important to address the market linkage. If the farmer is not getting a fair price for his production, we can talk about solutions, but at the end of the day, as farmer, and I don't have the fair price, so I'm not willing to invest. And it's not only the case in Africa. Some months ago, we had issues in Europe, in some European countries, because of that, because the farmers are saying, look, we are working hard, but we are not earning enough money to feed our families, even in Europe, not only in Africa. So we need somehow to have a strong linkage of the value chain, and we need to ensure the farmer a fair price. Logistics is an issue. In some countries, the price of the grain could go from 1 to 3 in the same country, just for logistic reasons, because you have to transport from area to area, then the price is 3 times higher. So, and this is why we addressed that with some, let's say, what we call farmer-centric programs, because at the end of the day, we know that, etc. What are we doing? This is the real question. And we need to share examples, and we need to share experience. I maybe take 2, 3 examples, and I can share more. So to address the value chain, we have a program called AgriBooster. AgriBooster is what? You bring different stakeholders, input providers, seed, mechanization, fertilizers, crop protection, with finance organism also, but also you bring the off-taker. The off-taker is the one who will buy the production from the farmers. So somehow you give them insurance that your production will go to the markets with a fair price. But also it's embedded with, let's say, training models, it's embedded with soil analyzers, recommendation, etc. So then you build this ecosystem around the farmer. It's farmer-centric. You train, you provide recommendation, you bring the whole value chain and the key stakeholders from finance to extension services to input providers, etc. And then you encourage the farmers to understand what his soil is needed, what the plant is needing, what the market is needing also, because at the end of the day, the farmers need to understand what are the requirements of the markets, either the normal standards or the secondary standards. This is one. I can maybe, there are many examples, but I think we have to manage the time also. Other thing that we are doing, we created a kind of what we call the farmer house. This is a house where the farmer can come, they can sit together. Again, the peer-to-peer knowledge sharing is very important, especially with smallholder farmers. So it's a house, you have a kind of meeting room, you can have some quality input there, you can have some laboratories to make soil analyzers, for example, training, but also the farmers can take it to sit together and to discuss about their challenges and share their experience. But also we link it to a program to train the young population coming from a rural area on sustainable agricultural practices for 2 reasons: to create jobs for them, because we train them, we equip them with recycles so they can make the link between the farmers and let's say the ecosystem to give recommendation to promote and extend sustainable agricultural practices. But also because there is a kind of trust between them and the farmer communities. And trust is very important because this is something maybe we can discuss about it, maybe not now because it's gonna take too much time, but those people are coming from the communities, they are well equipped, they are trained, and they can deliver the recommendation to the farmers with the trust because they are coming from their families and their communities. Last thing, addressing food security can be done in different ways. And one of the things that we forgot is the forgotten crops. So we call them forgotten crops, underutilized crops, orphan crops, whatever. There are many names for that. But for me, those crops, like, fonio, mambala groundnuts, maybe cassava also could be considered there, etc. They are existing in African continent since a while. They are feeding people, okay? But nobody, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating to say nobody, but there is no interest from people to work on those crops, which are resilient to climate change, which are adapted to the population and their feeding needs, and which are also maybe presenting a huge potential of addressing all what we are talking about in terms of food and security, climate resilience, just with minimum scientific, agronomic, and maybe some value share commitment to develop those forgotten or underutilized or orphan crops. Thank you.
Eu acho que esse ponto que você colocou é extremamente.
I think what you said is quite relevant, and we're talking about food security. But you see where we went to, that's a global issue. To what extent is hunger feeding conflict, or is it the opposite way? I think you are really, you did very good in starting the discussion with this point, because hunger, not only in African countries, but at global level, what we see is conflicts coming from severe economic crisis that end up producing food insecurity. So this is a point, and we are coming to the end of this panel, but I'd like you to try to develop a little bit more about that before we wrap up.
I'm going to make this quick. It's a time thing, obviously. And I might risk the appearance of not being diplomatic. But regarding security, I'm glad there are a lot of technicians here, OCP group. They know farming. They know agriculture. I think anybody in this room should talk to this man, especially when it comes to Africa. But when it comes to, and I'm concerned about a narrative. There's a dominant narrative as it relates to Africa when it comes to security. You know, death, hunger, corruption, that is not the narrative that dominates the continent. From Algiers to Cape Town, that is not a consistent narrative. And it's a dangerous narrative. It impacts investment and more. I'm Ugandan, and Kenyans don't really like us that much. I hope there are no Kenyans here. If they are, I'm sorry. You're a Kenyan. They don't like us much, and they don't like us much because I think we have maybe 3 seasons. Correct me if I'm wrong. It rains all the time. The soil is fertile. Everybody's chubby. Everybody. I'm a little chubby. So we have so much food. And my point is, Uganda is not Somalia. Uganda is not Juba. Uganda is not the Sahel. The narrative is complicated, and and for interested investors, you need to look at the continent in specifics. Where, what are you doing? How do you want to do it? The security lens is a challenge, and we do have our challenges, I agree, you know, but these challenges don't exist in Windhoek, in Eswatini. They don't exist everywhere. We know where they exist, and we're working on it. Thank you.
Do you want to talk? No, it's okay for you?
Okay. Well, yes, of course, nobody can be ready or fully prepared for conflict. And as you said, does conflict bring hunger or hunger brings conflict? So that's, you know, that's a big issue. But I think we have to invest and focus on local empowerment and capacity building. That's a way to also be prepared as much as one could be, especially if you are vulnerable or small. So that's where, for instance, training, developing agripreneurs, extension workers, and that's where Brazil-Africa cooperation can also help. If we could have an approach of like a Brazil-Africa innovation corridor, that could also help us, for example, for Brazilian companies to go and help, inclusive farmers in Africa, where, you can have youth and women also participating and can also build resilience towards conflict. For instance, we can collaborate with value chains, and you were talking about that, Anis, and even for garden crops. I think that's important, where we can have soybean, maize, pulses, or value chains to bring these joint inclusive agribusinesses stronger and be more prepared for conflict situations. Thank you.
Ok. Professor, eu vou fazer.
Professor, now we will just wrap up. But would you like to add any comment to it? Yes, I just want to insist on the topic of hunger and conflict. There are a relationship in both. Hunger causes conflict, and the conflict causes hunger. Many times you have conflicts that has independent causes from hunger. Gaza is an example of that. It starts with an attack, and they attack back, and this causes hunger. The final result is hunger. That's what is important to consider. And how can we avoid that? Stop the conflict. There's no other way to do it, regardless the cause, to stop the conflict. And in order to stop the conflict, many times this requires a political decision. Unfortunately, our multilateral system and the UN today is so weakened. There's not even a reason for it to exist, because they cannot. The UN was created to ensure peace after the war, but they are not being able to do that because of the boycott of big, powerful nations. And you must have seen recently a visit from Professor Ferrajoli to Brazil. He's an Italian judge who wrote a book that I highly recommend to be read. It's called By a Earth Constitution, or a constitution of the earth, the land. And in the very first pages, he says, we have created a multilateral system where you have first paragraph, it is created with voluntary adherence of the countries. And then it says each country has their own sovereignty, so they do whatever they want. So it would never work. So we have to change that situation. It is in the international system's DNA that multilateralism does not work. We should change that. I always bring this topic to the macro level because we try to find micro solutions that work at micro level, and they should be multiplied and valued. Give an example. For example, improving insurance of the farmers. This is a good solution. There's no question about it. But in economics, there's a Keynesian time. Keynes, a big economist, said, on the long run, we will be all dead. So we have to see if whether this solution will come before this time where we will all be dead. Many times the solutions that we propose to end hunger and conflicts are longer than this time. This increase on case after case is a Keynesian time that is very hard to accomplish. We have to find massive solutions to end hunger. Okay, we're going to wrap up. I'd like each one of you to make your final considerations, because we have no more time and this is a long topic. We can start from you, okay?
Yeah, you can start. Yeah. Yes, we are finishing again, and
Yes, I just didn't want to, jump in before you said we were right. We were ready.
okay.
No, I think this is all about cooperation, and South-South cooperation is not a new thing. It's something that we, have been trying to encourage and detonate from the different fronts that we all represent. And I believe that, this is not just about exchanging technology or exchanging innovation or good practices. It's about building trust. It's about, cooperating for learning. It's about cooperating for resilience. And once we have this mechanism of exchanging and cooperating and partnering up, from both sides of the ocean, again, from Latin America and Brazil working together, the world will benefit, because both Brazil and Africa can be, as I said in the beginning, the testing grounds for solutions to really help and overcome the challenges in terms of food security and food sovereignty. And any lessons that we learn here can be scaled up, can be replicated in other areas of the world, even Asia. And from the CGIAR, we are, as I said, ready and willing to cooperate with the Brazil Africa Institute. Thank you, Professor Joao, for this invitation. And really, for instance, we have recently signed with the Embrapa here in Brazil our memorandum of understanding to work with gene banks to have work done on resilient seeds that can also benefit Africa. And with Africa, we have recently signed, in AGRA, in the AFSF recent forum, also a memorandum of understanding to help with digital agriculture development. So I think this can work in both ways. And again, we are here to help and to support this kind of platforms that help South-South cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I keep partnership as a keyword, and somehow no one should be left behind. So partnerships is large as a word, and depending on the situation, you need to have different partners. We need to have the farmers as, let's say, focal points for all what we are doing, because if not, we will not achieve this adoption at scale that we are targeting. So for me, partnerships centered on farmer needs. And then, and I think Joaquim raised good points and good example. What Embrapa was doing, is doing, and will be doing in Brazil is a good example. And I believe this is something that could be, let's say, as a concrete case of, let's say, South-South cooperation, and especially between Africa and Brazil. The experience of Embrapa in Brazil is amazing, and this is something that certainly the African continent would be willing to learn and to customize to the African realities. Maybe I'm projecting myself in the future also, because we know what's happened, we know maybe what should be done, and maybe I open brackets, it's very important that it was addressed. Let's start with pilots. Let's make it successful, because at the end of the day, to be honest, since 25 years I'm working on African continents, many initiatives, many projects with many stakeholders, etc. But frankly speaking, the adoption rates of the innovation is very low. Let's think maybe about some concrete success stories that we can scale up and we can, let's say, extend to other geographies or to other categories of farmers, etc. But I close the brackets. I was trying to say, beside that, let's also project ourselves in the future. And it was addressed with the climatic change. The conflicts and food insecurity will become more and more, let's say, not important, I don't find the right word, severe somehow, and unpredictable also. And this is a challenge for all of us because we are talking about situation where you understand what is happening, but also there is a situation that is coming and nobody is able to predict. And somehow we need to address the climate resilience. We need to mitigate that, and we need to address the adaptation also. So it was mentioned by Joaquim, there is an interest of many international stakeholders also to address that, and this is a kind of really key components of the coming partnerships, not to address the existing, let's say, challenges with concrete solutions, but also to anticipate what is happening, what would happen. Last thing, and let's address it, I'm always putting myself in the shoes of the farmers. So beside what we talk about, value chain, fair price, etc., now we are asking the farmers also to deliver additional services, which is the ecosystem services. So somehow to address the biodiversity, to address the greenhouse gas emission and water regulation, etc., by sustainable agricultural practices, which is good, in fact. But as a farmer, why I should invest on that? Beside the premium price that I will get for my production, etc., but I'm investing in something that is having an impact on everybody, globally, to maintain the biodiversity, water storage, regulation, carbon sequestration, etc. How shall we monetize that? How shall we empower the farmer? How shall we, let's say, encourage them to adopt those sustainable practices? So those are some questions and some reflections that we should all think about it. I think for me the partnership is the last word, and really I was happy to participate to this panel, and thanks again for the organizer for the invitation. And the discussion and the dialogue will continue between us, between farmers, between scientific, between international organization, private sector, and public sector. Thank you.
Templar, it's
I'll make it
it's
quick.
your turn.
I'll make it quick. I absolutely agree with you. We need more partnerships. Thank you so much for having me. It's a very timely time to meet and discuss Brazil-Africa relations. I think we can do a lot right now. Everybody's excited on the continent to do more business with Brazil. Market or trade diversification is a real issue internationally. This is a great opportunity to do more around partnerships. Thanks.
Bem, nosso tempo tem
Right. We have no more time. We could be fit on time. So thank you so much for this conversation with you. It was, I think you could listen from people who really know for 25 years working with Africa, and you really know the area, the continent, and all their challenges. Professor, thank you so much. Thanks so much to you all. Thank you. Thank you to the participants for doing the first plenary session. Thank you.
The Brazil-Africa Forum. I'd like to ask these distinguished speakers to get together for a photo of the panel, if possible. Muito obrigada a todos.
Thank you so much. So you're going to have a picture of this panel, having shared great insights for us to finish the morning session of the day one of Brazil-Africa Forum 2025. So we will go now even more inspired for the rest of the day. Thank you once again for your participation in this session. As I said, we are finishing the morning session of Brazil-Africa Forum 2025. We're going to have a lunch break now. The application of the event is having relevant information for you, so you can be in touch with each other, getting to know who is making Brazil-Africa Forum to happen. So you can see a QR code on your badges that takes you to download the app. So I highly recommend you to download the app. Use this lunch break to download the app and start your interaction with the participants of this event. An event that is made by connections and partners. And I'd like to remind you that one of the partners offers to all here a special publication. All of you have received in your bags the book, Brazil and Africa, Connecting the Future. So that's a publication by Adaci Reis, lawyer and CEO of Santiago Dantas Institute of Law and Economy, a partner of Brazil-Africa Forum 2025, to whom the Institute Brazil-Africa thanks for this event. So here's the recognition of one of the partners of the current edition. So as we said,